Welcome back to the show. Today we have Dr. Patty Fletcher. She helps leaders change the world. Patty, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. You did the radio version a while ago now, and I thought, I've had some questions, and I wanted your kind of thoughts about some things. But maybe before we kind of get into that, do you maybe want to give the audience a little bit of a background on yourself, kind of where you grew up, where you went to school, and kind of talk about what you do kind of now?
Sure, absolutely. I am talking to you right now from my home office in Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts, and left for a while, as we talked about in the
Sure.
last show. Left for a while and came back. And the truth is that although I live here, the majority of work that I do is always somewhere else. So I'm trying very, very hard to get a little bit more into the Boston community because there's so much going on here, of course. But what I do, you had mentioned I help leaders change the world. And so what does that look like, right? It's all about catalyzing change, and change doesn't happen unless the people around you are involved in it, which means harnessing all the best and available talent. And as you know, in the world of tech or tech jobs and other industries, we tend to have one population represented, and
Sure.
yet there are multiple populations who consume tech, right? For multiple reasons. And so my job is I tend to work with women
Okay.
leaders in tech, as well as overall leaders, and really help them to try to figure out how can I harness all the best and available talent to develop products that make sense for the market I serve. And
Okay.
I do that through, consulting and coaching and all that stuff. I also have been a lot more focused in on advocacy. So I'm very, very fortunate to work with some amazing organizations and amazing people, and be able to do things like go on stages and talk about career equity for women, talk about what we know when it comes to the role of unconscious bias and what we can do to prevent, eradicate, and ultimately eliminate unconscious bias from decisions. And that's some work that I'm doing at SAP, and using technology to be able to solve that. And of course, all of the work with startups. Some reports came out that only 2% of venture funding last year went to startups that had women on their founding team. That's a problem, right?
Sure.
So
Totally.
continuing to do some advocacy there, both on the public and policy side in DC, as well as some folks across the pond, but also just enabling people to be able to have a voice for themselves, to come together and focus on the topics that really matter when it comes to harnessing talent.
Sure. No, I think that's actually really interesting, and kind of what I really wanted your thoughts on, because, obviously you're doing this yourself. You've been in this industry a long time. Obviously you've been super successful in this, and I kind of wanted your take on, I know there's so many people that talk about like, oh, we could do this and we could do this, but you kind of have really taken the approach of like actually giving people examples and things that they can do to actually make a difference, instead of like, in
Mhm.
theory, if we do this, and so,
Right.
right, like, so I'm
It's true.
yeah. And so how do we kind of get women and kind of other, groups of people involved in technology that are kind of, not the stereotypical white male like myself?
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to start this off by saying we need the stereotypical white male. We just need
Okay.
other people too,
Sure.
right?
Everybody.
And this yeah, and so some of the things around this topic that I think are really important. This isn't a women's issue.
Sure.
This isn't a race issue, right? This isn't a I'm not a white dude issue. This is an issue about we have constructs that define industry. We have systems that define business. Those have not been updated to reflect the current consumer pools,
Sure.
the current business buyer pools, and the current workforce, right? These
Sure.
are challenges. And so change requires a catalyst. Period. End of story. I am here to say that all of those problems that come with having an exclusive kind of culture, which is really what we have, they are very cultural. They're very hard to solve because they're human, right? And again, we need the catalyst to actually go from, wow, this is a really good idea, to, I'm going to try some things that are new and different. The technology is already there, the
Sure.
processes are already there. So it's just a matter of, are the people in charge, the people of influence, willing to make the changes? And when things are going right, there's very little catalyst for change. When things are going wrong, it's much easier to look at the symptoms and say, let's see, I'm a business to business vendor, and the budgets are down for IT. Or gosh, I'd like to hire more African American women, but I can't find them.
Sure.
So how do we go from the idea to the action? It's awareness is first and foremost.
Okay.
And I will say some of the most effective things, right? And this isn't, I'm not going to convert anybody, so you have to already kind of be there.
Sure.
And that first stage is awareness, right? And part of the job here is to create that awareness. Number one, not a philanthropic topic. This is an economic topic. If women were paid, women in the workforce today, not adding any more women, if the women in the workforce today were paid equal to their male counterparts, it would add $12 trillion to the economy.
Wow.
That's $12 trillion
Wow.
more, right, to spend on stuff.
Sure.
And that's more than the combined GDPs of three countries, of Japan, the UK, and France, right?
Wow,
so
that's interesting.
yeah, right? So that's huge. So there's the economic imperative. Then there is that kind of business thing. And that, economic imperative is important, but it's hard to touch, right? It's
Sure.
hard to kind of feel personal there. But when we think about from a business perspective, what happens when you start bringing folks in who represent the population you're selling to? All of a sudden, you have kind of ready-made users, ready-made buyers, and your product starts to get even more innovative, which is hard to imagine if things are going well.
Mm-hmm.
But really imagine how much better that they could be. With all of that said, I will tell you, when it comes to the topic of women in tech, the biggest change agent is when that influencer, who tends to be a male, when that influencer or decision maker has a daughter.
Sure.
And
I
they
can
start
see that.
asking
Yeah.
themselves, right?
That's fair.
Will, like for you, you
Yep.
have a son and a daughter.
Yep.
Do you want your daughter to have the same opportunities as your
Totally.
son? Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. I
I've
hope
thought
so.
a lot about
Right?
that,
So
actually. Yeah,
that's
that you
right.
bring up an interesting point. I thought a lot about that since like I had a daughter, obviously. Yeah, it's interesting.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And then you become the voice. So how do we get this to happen? So first and foremost is getting folks in front of the populations, right? When you're in a decision-making role, you tend to be closed off, right? You might have your one-on-ones, you might do your town halls, but your day-to-day is very much with other executives, which can create this almost, kind of person in a castle on top of the hill, right? Very, very separate. It was really interesting. I was at the Mobile World Congress a few weeks ago, and the MC, who was from one of the big consulting firms, I had gone up on stage and I did a TED Talk kind of version around career equity. And I talked about my grandmother and the role she had in my life, and ended up with my father, and talked about kind of, the challenges and all that stuff in between. But it was so interesting because what that ended up happening was I had a lot of men come up to me after and say, this topic became important to me because of the women I lead. And I saw that they weren't having the same opportunities as the men I lead. And that
Interesting.
bothered me. Yeah.
Sure.
Or, it was my grandmother too, or I have 3 daughters, right? So it's all about tapping into that catalyst. And we've gone down this path of those economic stats I just shared with you. Those are great. They're kind of icing on the cake. This is a hearts and minds thing. So
Sure.
what's
Okay.
that awareness of what happens when there is inequity, right? What happens when, what will happen to you, decision maker, if the women around you or the other underrepresented populations around you aren't able to have their talent harnessed? And then let's use an entrepreneurial approach, right? Let's do things like test reverse mentoring. Let's test having an advocacy program. Advocates are one of or I would say probably the number one reason why men excel and women don't. Women get mentored, men get advocated and championed for, right? So how do we start testing stuff like that? How do we turn our leaders into advocates? How do we do things like, I don't know, maybe pay women equally, right? How do we have different approaches to calibrating top talent? These are very simple kinds of things to change, but very scary because you start changing the system.
Sure.
But all of that said, this very long answer is you focus on the content and not on the person. That's how you catalyze change. You do lots of what if scenarios. You look for ways to have it feel personal. Give them all the economic stats you want, but really figure out what can't you do if you don't tackle this. And companies like SAP are doing a really great job, right? They are an enterprise software provider, the largest in the world. So ultimately, every system in a company, if you have SAP, is run on SAP software. And one of that is human capital management,
Okay,
which is
interesting.
not just the role of HR, the people who own people strategy, but also managers, employees, right? It's where we put our data in, it's where we do all the performance stuff. And where they've come to with this is that diversity and inclusion is not separate from leadership. It's not separate from people strategy. It's not separate from human resources. It's how you do all those things.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah, the catalyst for that was seeing that they were leaving out populations, right? And that their
Sure.
customers were too. But the biggest catalyst is, what does that mean? The war for talent is still there. I don't think there's a talent shortage. I just think companies have this system set up where they're ignoring those populations.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. That's interesting that like how you phrase it like that. I think the thing that's interesting to me about the whole topic is I think and partly why I wanted to have, you yourself back on the show is like you've been doing this, right? And so like obviously people can potentially reach out to you or get help
Yep.
from you or people like yourself that have been there, kind of done that and are still doing it, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
and we were talking about this kind of before we recorded, like it can be kind of lonely, right?
It
When you're
is.
kind of doing something that not everybody's doing. And I think until you're kind of actually in it, you don't really realize what you're going through. And even just like people as close as like your, family and friends don't understand kind of exactly what you're going through because they're not being an entrepreneur, they're not doing
Yeah.
their own kind of thing. And I think it kind of ties together with trying to bring up, the underserved kind of populations or different types of people kind of globally, right? And
Hmm.
so how do you kind of help people kind of get over that, right? Because I think we all struggle with that as an entrepreneur, and it doesn't really matter gender, race, or wherever you are on the
Hmm.
planet. I think everybody struggles with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's entrepreneurs are very, very, very good at getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Sure.
And I
Yep.
think we probably talked about this the last time. And so entrepreneurship is a lonely place. You have this goal that's crazy and not everybody sees it, and they don't really have the vision, but they might not have that catalyst, to your point, right? And until you walk in the shoes of somebody who does not have the system around them supporting their ideas and what they do, it's very hard to understand that and
Sure.
to live it. Just like you and I, right? We're entrepreneurs. It'd be very hard for me to step in the shoes of somebody who is perhaps a bit more operational.
Sure.
And I would have a hard time with that, right? I
Yeah, me too.
can't understand that, right? I don't get, like, what do you mean that's a problem? Who cares, right? So it's that same kind of thing. So there's a few things, right? We can wait forever for stuff to change. Oh, wait, we have been waiting forever for stuff to
Sure.
change. So while people like me are out there and using our voices and building a platform and really pushing in on the glass ceiling, I'm mostly focused on women, but I absolutely have other key populations that I focus in on. So, like, we continue to do that and look for other people who have big voices who others will listen to, right? So I'm constantly looking for influencers. So that's that kind of top level glass ceiling. But the majority of people, we're just out there working every day. We're trying to build our business. We're trying to get funding. We're trying to make change in a big company. And that's when we start talking about self advocacy. As you know, and you and I talked a little bit from a prep perspective about all the stuff happening out in the world. In the US, over in Europe, there's a very kind of populist culture, right? That's very reflective of fear.
Sure.
And it's, oh God, things are changing. This is really scary. I have refugees who are going to come in and take our jobs and, steal everything from us and all of that stuff, right? It's these kinds of, some things, there's data to support those fears, and that's what you're going to pay attention to. I look at that same data and I don't see it. And so those aren't the folks I'm talking to. The folks that I help are the folks who want to create change for themselves in That's usually where it starts, or the people around them, and it comes to themselves. Either it doesn't matter, but they want to make that micro change. And it's like, so what are some of the things we can do? When I was at Mobile World Congress, Pat Milligan, who was responsible for the Women Thrive research at Mercer. She got up on stage after I did, and she's been on this topic for 30 something years. And she challenged the audience. She said, raise your hand if you've ever gone for a job or promotion, and you said to the person who'd be hiring you or giving you that promotion, what are you going to do to ensure that I get paid the same as the white guy sitting next to me? What are you going to do to ensure that my career aspirations are supported and I can contribute in the way that I can? Use your gosh darn voice. Not one person ever raises their hand. I think in that audience one did, but they usually don't. And they don't because they're afraid they won't get the job or the promotion, right? Because the system's set up against them.
Yep.
Here's the thing. Let's remember the shortage of talent. You're right. You might not get that job, but guess what? There's a startup or there's a big logo who does need what you have to offer, who does need your human capital, and you will be supported there. So it's all about, let's stop trying to defend and justify why these other underrepresented populations belong in the room, why I belong in the room, why you belong in the room. And instead, let's look at what we bring to the table and start putting some power back into ourselves and say, if you're not aligned with where I'm going and how I want to spend my time, and I'm not aligned with where you're going and you want to spend your time and your goals, let us part ways.
Interesting.
That's going to hurt after a while. So it's looking at very specific things around, if you're an entrepreneur, what are you trying to do? Understanding the system. Only 2% of venture funding goes to women. That's a lot of work we have to do. It's not about a PowerPoint, right, and perfecting your pitch deck. It's about creating those relationships. It's about holding people accountable. It's about not changing people's minds with this is the right thing to do. What a wonderful philanthropic conversation. It's about, I have this amazing business. Here's the opportunity. Why the heck aren't you funding it, right?
Sure.
Keep talking. If it's in corporate, it's the same thing. How are you ensuring that you have a champion, right? How are you going out and finding them? How your company has a mentor program. Here are the things you can do to turn that mentor into an advocate. So when you're not in the room, they're recommending you for stuff. And then the final thing is about building community. Since the election over here, since all of the elections and stuff going on overseas, and this whole kind of fear of the women are going to take all of our high paying jobs, the people who don't look like me are going to take all of our jobs, you're going to take all of the government's money. You know what? For every one of them, there's 5 women, 5 men just like you. Go find them. The collective voice is important, and never, ever go dirty, right? Always focus in on what has to change. What has to change.
Sure. No, I think that's actually really a good way of putting it, and it's really good advice for people because, and the thing that came to mind when you were talking about that is, I know like oil companies right now are having a hard time recruiting young people, which just because of like how they're polluting the planet and like, so if basically the younger generation is like, I'm not working for you. So they either change or they're not going to get employees, right? And, you know, obviously as people retire and kind of move away into, you know, retirement, and if they can't fill those positions, they have to change to recruit. And I get that it's kind of unrelated, but I think the message is kind of the same, right? To your point, right? Like we can't just, there's no point in kind of just preaching at it. You need to actually like do this.
Make some
right?
change.
Yeah, make some change, right?
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me, right? And so I'm curious, though, to get your thoughts on kind of how do you go about kind of, and you touched on it, make yourself almost like indispensable to a company, right? So they do kind of, you know, see that you're loyal and want to kind of maybe go like stay with them long term, or kind of say, yeah, you know, we really want to mentor this person to get them to where they want to be in their career, whether it's with us or without us.
I think it's changing the conversation. So having yourself become essential. is really, really important. What's really important though is that how you view a job, right? So my generation, the Gen X generation, was very much informed by the baby boomers before
Sure.
us. And the baby boomers are really hit hard by the myth of cradle to grave, right? The traditionalist population before them very used to cradle to grave. Then the baby boomers come and their world gets rocked, and my generation just kind of watched them and went, crap. And we're all about working super hard, but we're also kind of, middle-aged now and going, what does this all mean, right? This company's killing the planet. This one has a total bro culture, right? And there's the older industries like oil and gas and the new industries, and they have a lot of problems, but we're so busy working in a business, it's hard to work on a business, and that's starting to change.
Sure.
And then we have the millennials who are saying, where I spend my time better align
Yep.
with where I'm going. So that's the first question. Stop putting so much power. I love this, the millennial effect, not millennials, but the effect of millennials, besides being digital natives and all of that,
Sure.
is it's really forced me, and therefore working with other people, to shift the power structure, right?
Interesting.
So instead of, I really hope they pay me equally, it's, let's see, I'm going to ask these tough questions. And I want to make sure that this company is aligned with where I want to go, the impact I want to make, and how I want to do that. And so then it's get brave, ask
Interesting.
the tough questions, be very straightforward around, why is this aligned with where you want to go? Why is this so important, right? And the essential bit comes when people can see that your passion is aligned. But the net is, are you contributing? Are you helping to accelerate from the company from where it is today to where it wants to be tomorrow? What do you bring to the table as a strategist, or somebody who can operationalize a strategy, or somebody who can read data, right? Or somebody, like, so on and so on. So understand what is critical. If these things do not happen within a strategy, the strategy will die. How are you going to make sure our strategy won't be realized? What do you bring to the table? Your relationships, your knowledge, your experience, but also what you're able to do in
Interesting.
order to achieve that, right? And if you're a woman, your voice does have to be a little bit louder.
Sure.
You do have to, yeah, because it's not going to be a given. We have unconscious biases that are at play. But the net, Kevin, is you freaking go for it. Everybody's afraid. Do it anyway.
Sure. No, that's really good advice actually, and kind of a good segue. So, you're writing a book, or you're in the process of
Yes.
writing a book that's kind of coming out early next year, maybe, or a little bit sooner. So, what exactly is the book going to be on, and have you picked a title for the book yet?
We have, and so we're gonna find out when the launch date will be soon.
Okay.
Um, but anyway, the book is really a culmination of research I started as part of my PhD program when I studied women who were board of director positions in life sciences and technology businesses. So few of them. And wanted to understand what were the common characteristics and factors that got them to where so few people have gone, let alone women. And then over the years, right, over the last decade, have interviewed way more people and got a lot more insight, both from doing it myself and from standing next to and working alongside some incredible men and women. And so the book is called, tentatively titled, Open the Damn Door. And really, it's about the whole concept of understanding women and how they have looked at a system. So first it's, here's the system and here's why it's working against you. And they said, great, awesome, right? Here are my strategies that I've done to not only impacted the system, but impacted my ability to be successful, to be able to execute on this vision, to find the right channel, whether it's this startup or that corporation, and be able to achieve that regardless of everything around you telling you you shouldn't. It's kind of my answer to Lean In. I very much appreciated the platform, the discussion that Sheryl Sandberg brought with Lean In. I did not appreciate the info inside there. And the reason is that the women I know, if we leaned in anymore, our faces would hit the ground.
Sure.
It's not us. This is not about fixing women. So the book is about the women who break the rules. What can we learn from them? because there is no one way, right? It's all informed by where you're working, who you're working
Sure.
with, all that kind of stuff. But there are multiple ways. And it's about seeing that you're going to have barriers,
Yep.
right, in the form of the system. And we all need to work on that. But here's what you can do for yourself. Here are some examples of women who've opened their own doors and have held it open for others. And that's what the book's about. It has a mix of research, very practical examples. It's an entertaining book, right? So we learn through storytelling.
Sure.
Um, and what we walk away with from a leadership perspective is absolutely inspiration, but also pragmatism. I go for this job. What do I do? My ideas are not heard. What do I do?
Sure. No, I think that's awesome. That's great. And people can look forward to that. But sadly, we're coming to the end of the show. So let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and find out about the book when it's available for pre order.
Awesome, sure. So my website is drpattyfletcher.com. Don't spell out doctor. It's DrPattyFletcher. I can't spell my own last name. And then I'm very active on Twitter, so it's PK Fletcher. If you go to my website, you'll see all the different places where I write: Huffington Post, Inc., Guardian, as well as a few others. And I tweet a lot about that as well. And then on Facebook, my page is Dr. Patty Fletcher.
Perfect, Patty. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day again to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You
All right.
too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.